Honorable members, the prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our Queen and to her government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Please be seated. Sounded to me a lot like during the prayer that there was a member received a text message, and unless that was from God himself, I'm sure you'll be paying a fine to the charity of your choice and owning up to it like all honorable members would be. I do have a brief... Honorable members, today marks International Women's Day, a global celebration of the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. Given we are here in this impressive chamber, it is perhaps most suitable that we focus on the latter, the political achievements of women in Alberta. During the Assembly's first meeting here in the chamber in 1911, there were 41 members of this Assembly, and none of them were women. Today, 25 women sitting in the chamber make a difference every day while representing hundreds of thousands of people who trust them as their elected representative. Irene Paulby, who became the first female cabinet minister in 1921, said, "If politics mean the effort to secure, through legislative action, better conditions of life for the people, greater opportunities for our children and other people's children, then it is most assuredly is a woman's job just as much as it is a man's job." International Women's Day serves as both a celebration and a reminder that it takes collective action and shared ownership to achieve full equality. Today, we honor the achievements of those who came before us with the aim to inspire collective action to address the many challenges that women continue to face both here in Alberta and around the world. I'm sure all members will join me in celebrating International Women's Day. If the Assembly will permit, I would like to make a note of another special day, in particular for your Speaker. Honorable members, in 2020-2021, more than 6 million words were spoken here in the Assembly and/or its committees. 6,400,053,127 words, to be exact. I know this because that's how many words were transcribed by our amazing Hansard staff. Today marks a very special anniversary for Hansard. It is today that marks the 50th anniversary since Hansard was first published, following a motion on March 8, 1972, to establish a, quote, printed record of the deliberations and proceedings of the sitting of the Assembly to be known as Alberta Hansard, which shall be compiled, edited, printed, distributed, and administered under the direction and the authority of the Speaker in accordance to this rule. More than 30,000 words will be spoken on an average afternoon sitting like today, and Hansard staff, including input editors, copy editors, proofreaders, and other professionals, work together to create a largely verbatim record of what is being discussed in the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. Prior to 1972, a collection of historical newspaper clippings, known as Scrapbook Hansard, provide a glimpse of the proceedings between 1906 and 1971. The introduction of Hansard marked a new era of transparency in the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, all transcripts from 1972 to now, as well as the scrapbook Hansard collection, are available on assembly.av.ca, providing an in-depth resource of the discussion that have shaped this province since its inception. A happy 50th anniversary to Hansard.
Introduction of visitors. Introduction of guests.
Honourable members, joining us in the galleries today is Marissa Maslink, a guest of the Minister of Infrastructure, and also joining us today, please welcome Aurora Ramsey, a guest of the member for Edmonton-Glenora. Aurora is a social work student joining us in recognition of Social Work Week. I ask you to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Highlands, Norwood.
A government's budget says a lot about their priorities, and let me tell you, this government's priority is certainly not women. Last year, the UCP didn't mention women once in their budget address. This year, they threw in a few fleeting references just so they could check the woman box. What an incredible opportunity this government was presented with. Skyrocketing oil prices meant that they could have taken visionary actions that would have had tangible, positive impacts on the lives of women. But instead, they boasted about balancing a budget on the backs of Albertans. And at every opportunity, when they've had a chance to invest in and support women, they've chosen not to. And on International Women's Day, I can't help but reflect on just how much this UCP government has failed women. I talk to women a lot. I love talking to women, and I ask them, what issues are top of mind? What keeps you up at night? And let me tell you what they say. Paying their bills, securing good employment, well-funded schools, strong public health care, a healthy planet, to name just a few issues. These aren't earth-shattering revelations. They're not radical ideas. International Women's Day should compel us to act, should compel us to do better as legislators. It's not good enough to sit back, like this government is doing, and dismiss the lived experiences of women. They've failed to act, and they've failed women. But enough about them. There is hope. We can elect a government that makes women a priority, that acknowledges women are key to a strong economy, that if women thrive, society thrives, that supports all workers, including low-wage women workers, who this government has repeatedly left behind, that invests in health and knows that mental health care is health care, that ensures childcare is universal, accessible, and affordable for all, that tackles misogyny, racism, and gender-based violence, and that protects, not attacks, reproductive rights. None of these things are out of reach, and with so many unapologetic, unrelenting, fierce as heck women in Alberta speaking out and stepping up, I'm more hopeful about what we can accomplish together. Happy International Women's Day.
The Honourable Member for Camrose has a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. March 8th marks International Women's Day around the globe. Today is a time to celebrate the women in our lives and all they do to build our communities. Alberta women have always been rugged pioneers, committed to making life better for future generations. Henrietta Muir Edwards, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinley, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, the famous five, fought for women's suffrage and for the right of women to run for the Canadian Senate and to sit on the Supreme Court of Canada. Violet King Henry was the first black woman lawyer in Canada and the first black person to be admitted to the Alberta Bar. She was also a champion for civil rights. Bertha Clark Jones, a Cree Métis woman who joined the Royal Canadian Air Force in 1940, became a fierce advocate for Indigenous veterans in Canada. Those are only a few of the women who have helped create a vibrant and diverse Alberta. Alberta's government continues to support women's economic recovery in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. Today we announced $1 million to support women pursuing post-secondary education in science, technology, engineering, and math. This is in addition to the STEM scholarship for women that is already in place. Women in Alberta are second in the nation with a 60.6% employment rate, while unemployment across the province has dropped to its lowest rate since before the pandemic. Alberta's government has also successfully negotiated a plan that will see licensed daycare fees drop by an average of 50% for Alberta families. There's more work to be done, but with so many driven and talented women in Alberta, I am confident we'll reach our goals together. Happy International Women's Day.
For Calgary Falconridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the past couple of weeks, gasoline prices have been gone higher than ever in Alberta. At the same time, many of my constituents are reaching out to me about their unusually high utility bills. Both Jugrinder and Balraj have said that their natural gas and electricity bills are so high that they're struggling to afford them. Our government has instituted a natural gas rebate program and offer a $150 electricity rebate. Not only that, but we also dropped the 13 cents per litre provincial tax on fuel. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Premier and all of the Cabinet for putting forward a plan to help Albertans. Of course, I can't say the same for Justin Trudeau and his allies. At the same time, our government is dropping taxes. The left-wing Liberals have committed to hiking their carbon tax even higher come April 1st, all with the support of the NDP. When the members opposite were in the government, they misled Albertans. They worked with Trudeau to tax Canadians for simply heating their homes and driving their cars. A deceitful plan to tax families at $20 per ton of CO2 is turning into $50 on April 1st. And by 2030, Canadians will be paying $170 per ton. That means just 40 cents per litre, just federal carbon tax. As the UCP offer relief for the cost of utilities and fuel, Justin Trudeau increased the carbon tax. The NDP stays silent in defending Albertans from Justin Trudeau. In fact, they cheer for him. They defend his policies. They claim that carbon tax has little to do with our current situation, but Mr. Speaker, every little bit helps. Thank you to the Premier for easing the burden for Albertans. With any sensitivity, Justin Trudeau and his allies should be trying to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton Millwoods and the opposition House Leader.
This government is completely out of touch with Albertans. As I knock on doors and talk to my constituents at Edmonton Millwoods, I hear it loud and clear. A week after introducing their budget, this government is celebrating, completely unaware of the struggling Albertans they've left behind. Utility bills are outrageous. We're hearing daily from Albertans who are facing bills in excess of $700, some owe thousands. Albertans who feel they have to choose between paying their utility bills or buying food for their family. And instead of hearing these concerns and responding with compassion, this government offers them $50 for electricity and a fake natural gas rebate that will never support Albertans because it's for next year and the rates that the government's own budget suggests will never be hit. Property taxes are up and likely to keep going up because this government would rather download costs to towns and cities instead of invest in them. Insurance bills are up because the Premier's insurance lobby friends are more important to his team than the Alberta families who can no longer afford to drive their cars. Income taxes are up because this Premier says one thing but does another, and he has reintroduced the very bracket creep that he once railed against. This budget uses increasing inflation as an opportunity for the government to pick the pockets of Albertans during a pandemic. Tuition is up because the government views students as cash cows rather than the future leaders of Alberta. And this government even anticipates making billions more in student debt, in part because they raised the interest rates on that debt. This budget provides no relief for struggling Albertans. Instead, it takes advantage of them, raising fees wherever they can, secretly hiking taxes, lifting caps in place to protect Albertans, and then shrugging away the concerns that they hear from families. It's shameful, but it's what Albertans have come to expect from this UCP government. Mr. Speaker, my message to those Albertans is hang on, keep your eyes forward. Alberta's NDP is on your side. We care about you, and we will come to work every day fighting for your family.
The honourable member for Chestermere Strathmore.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. As I stand here, surrounded by safety on Treaty 6 territory, Métis Region 4, women and children in Ukraine are being sent to other countries to protect them from attacks on their sovereign nation. The displacement of these peaceful people will most definitely see Canada and Alberta stepping up to support Ukrainians as they seek safety and perhaps permanency. Ukrainian pride is exemplary, and former Canadian journalist Nathan Vanderclip of the Globe and Mail reported, as people in Odessa bagged sand to protect them from attack, opera singers sang an anthem, and it translates to, "Ukraine is not dead, nor its glory and freedom." To those fleeing from war in hopes to return to their homes when it's safe, we can be your safe haven. And if you choose to stay, we would be all the richer to have you. Mr. Speaker, by Sunday morning, more than 1.5 million Ukrainians had fled their sovereign nation, and we must be ready to find them homes, provide speedy integration into our communities, expedite resources of necessity, and surround them with compassion and support. This will be instrumental in welcoming and accommodating all those who have experienced trauma and loss and tremendous upheaval. Our government will have to prepare our healthcare system, expand our education system, and offer safe shelter to relatives who need to stay together. Nonprofit and non-government organizations catch everything that public policy doesn't catch, such as settlement needs, health and mental health support, self-care, and accessibility. Non-government organizations in Alberta that are part of the NGO Council, like the Red Cross, they're getting constant updates on these needs, and this is the type of expert intel that we need as Alberta opens her arms wide to all those who need her. And we must fund those NFPs and NGOs that go beyond the basics of food and shelter. Everyday Albertans are also ready to help. Alberta-based volunteerconnector.org is a nationwide digital portal that matches volunteers and organizations. Together, through our government, working with these compassionate and experienced Albertans, Alberta will show the world once again what the power of community and kindness and generosity can accomplish, where Ukrainians can call this their home away from home.
The honourable member for Edmonton Castle Downs.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday Albertans got to witness the most confusing sight. UCP staff in the Premier's office were attacking the UCP's Fort McMurray by-election candidate for the extreme views of his supporters. Albertans aren't surprised to hear that the Premier's office is more focused on saving the Premier's job than addressing the many policy failures this government has delivered. His chief of staff, his most senior political advisor, has already taken a leave to go to Red Deer and organize against the UCP's own members. And while Albertans are not surprised to hear that a UCP candidate has extreme views or is supported by those with extreme views, they are surprised to hear that the UCP suddenly cares about this. The UCP didn't care when their MLA for Tabor-Warner chose to visit an illegal blockade where present was a group plotting the murder of RCMP officers. The Premier even said that he was doing his job. The UCP didn't care when the Premier's speechwriter was found to have written sexist, racist, and homophobic remarks. The Premier failed to care when the former Justice Minister was found by a judge of attempting to interfere in the administration of justice. And it goes on and on. And all of what I've just gone through is why Albertans from far and wide no longer trust this Premier. They don't believe he genuinely cares about them. But I know that the leader of Alberta's official opposition is ready. She will work to bring Albertans together, not drive them apart. She will hold her fellow caucus members accountable. She will call out hate and corruption. She will show that, yes, she truly cares about Alberta's families. Our leader is fighting off COVID right now, and I wish her well. And I know that she's still working to serve Albertans from home. And Mr. Speaker, I can't wait to serve in her government again come 2023 or sooner if it comes to that. Thank you.
Honourable members, the time is 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the honourable member for Edmonton, Glenora, has the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin by wishing the House a happy International Women's Day. And to let you know, all of our questions today will be coming from the women in our caucus. Mr. Speaker, this budget is barely 2 weeks old, and the Premier is already rewriting it. Yesterday, he said if global oil prices stay high, Alberta may stumble upon billions of dollars in additional revenue. So today, I'm asking the Premier and the UCP to sincerely help Alberta families. Budget 2022 raises school fees and education property taxes by $117 million. Will the Premier reverse those fee hikes today?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, the President of Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to talk a little bit about Budget 2022. In Budget 2022, effectively, we report our fiscal progress for 3 years, Mr. Speaker. We've managed to keep operating expenses flat during 3 years at a time when we inherited cost increases from the previous government of 4% per year. Mr. Speaker, what that would have meant to Albertans, had we stayed on that trajectory, was inevitable tax increases for Albertans today and future generations. We've been responsible. We've avoided that.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Glenora.
To any of the parents watching, I just asked about education property tax hikes executed by the UCP government, and I asked them to stop those tax increases and the school fee increases, and the Minister of Finance said no. Mr. Speaker, these fees come out of the pockets of parents who are trying to pay their bills, they're trying to buy food and clothing to make sure that their kids get a great education. The Premier thinks they should pay more in school fees, but what will they get in return? Not more teachers, because in this budget there were 1,000 fewer teachers than there were under the NDP. Will the Premier rewrite the budget and put more teachers back into the classroom?
The Honourable Minister of Education is risen.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows full well that it is school boards who charge school fees. And in fact, they're doing it as they are putting more dollars into their reserves. We went from $363 million to $464 million as of August in operating reserves. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite, when she was the board chair for Edmonton Public School Division, raised school fees 3 years in a row. $28 million in 2011-2012, $29 million in school fees 2012 to 2013, and $31 million in 2013-2014. Oh, and $37 million in 2014-15.
Order. The honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows full well that under Conservative budgets that failed to increase funding for education, that many boards were put in a position that they felt they had to do that. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite also knows that she repealed a bill that capped school fees and refused to increase them. The member opposite also knows that she is responsible for the legislation that's hiking up school fees. If the members opposite want to ask questions of the NDP, they can call the election.
Who's rising? The Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think everybody heard me earlier, so I will repeat what I said. The member opposite, as board chair, raised fees 3 years in a row for Edmonton Public School Division. Over $28 million fees for 2011-2012, $29 million in 2012-2013, $31 million in 2013-14, and $37 million in 2014-2015. These fees are for extracurricular activities, field trips, facility rentals, and so much more, Mr. Speaker. These are absolutely in the purview of school boards.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Glenora for the second set of questions.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, let's take a look at what the UCP has done with the family budget. John and Jane, they make an average Alberta income. They have 2 kids. They get by, but times are getting tougher. This year, because the Premier increased their income tax and reduced their benefits, they're going to lose $400. That's $400 not going towards groceries or bills or activities for the family. So will the Finance Minister or the Premier, why won't they rewrite the budget to actually put this money back in the family budget?
The Honourable Finance Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely reject what the member opposite is asserting. We have not increased income taxes, Mr. Speaker, in this province. A person earning $50,000 this year will pay exactly what they did last year, Mr. Speaker. But had we stayed on the trajectory that the previous government left us, we would have had no choice but to raise taxes, Mr. Speaker. In fact, a future government would have had no choice but to raise taxes like the members opposite did when they brought in the carbon tax.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Glenora.
Mr. Speaker, they did raise taxes. The Premier is making life harder on families, and he has no plan to stop. It's clear that he doesn't care. Martin and Mary are seniors. They live on a fixed income, but costs keep going up, and their seniors' benefit does not. This year, they will lose $360 compared to what they would have received if the Premier simply recognized that inflation is hurting every Albertan in this province. Will the Premier rewrite the budget to support seniors living on a fixed income? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, we have the highest senior benefits of any province across the country. The top payment in this province is $285 a month. The average of similar-sized provinces is $60 a month. We have not reduced that amount, Mr. Speaker. I reject the assertion in the member's question. But what we've done, we've brought in a utility rebate, Mr. Speaker, for January, February, March of this month, a $150 rebate for all Albertans paying an electricity bill.
The honourable member.
Speaker, the UCP wants to talk about running a rebate program. I don't think most Albertans would trust them to run a bath, let alone a rebate program. The question was about seniors' benefits, and if the government cared enough, they would pretend to answer it. Heather is living on AISH. She's severely disabled. She's been betrayed by a party that promised to inflation-proof her benefits, and then they shamefully broke that promise. If the UCP kept their promise, Heather would have $1,000 more this year to help her make ends meet. Will the Premier rewrite his budget for her, apologize to Albertans on AISH, and finally keep his word and do the right thing?
Will you do that? The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have maintained AISH benefits, which are $400 higher than the next nearest province. And, Mr. Speaker, we've done it because we believe this government should support the most vulnerable. We believe Albertans have a priority of supporting the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, had we continued on the trajectory we inherited from the previous government, we would not have been able to deliver programs for future generations, Mr. Speaker. We brought fiscal responsibility to the province, which will ensure delivery of efficient programs in the future.
The honourable member for Lethbridge West has the call.
Albertans are having a hard time paying their bills. I'm hearing it from my constituents, and I know the finance minister is hearing it too. Because at a recent town hall, a woman was trying to ask him for help with her electricity bill. $1,900, Mr. Speaker. The minister's response, he dismissed her concerns, claiming rebates only cause inflation and hurt the economy. Fast forward to today, it's quite the rewrite. Does the minister really think that a $50 on a $1,900 bill is going to help that Albertan and that constituent of his?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I find it very rich coming from the members opposite when they talk about affordability. The members opposite, when they were in government, jacked taxes on personal income tax, increased corporate income taxes. Mr. Speaker, introduced the carbon tax, which added costs for every Albertan. Mr. Speaker, we're delivering efficient government, keeping taxes low. We've come out with the utility rebate, and Mr. Speaker, effective April 1st, we're eliminating the fuel tax for 3 months.
The honourable member.
For the folks watching at home, some clear evidence the minister doesn't want to talk about your electricity bills. So the minister then had the nerve to tell his constituents that he was in the same boat. He claimed he couldn't pay his own power bill on his comfortable salary. But, Mr. Speaker, no one feels sorry for him. This morning, he admitted that he's raising personal income taxes by $1 billion without batting an eye. Why doesn't the minister reverse that change and actually help families with their bills?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we are not raising income taxes. I completely reject the member's assertion. Mr. Speaker, the only folks in this House who raised taxes were the members opposite. They raised taxes on individuals. They raised taxes on corporations, sending tens of billions of dollars out of this province. They introduced a carbon tax, one they did not even campaign on, Mr. Speaker. We're delivering efficient government. We're ensuring Alberta will be the lowest tax jurisdiction in the nation.
A point of order is noted at 1:59. The honourable member for Lethbridge West.
So for the folks watching at home, the minister also doesn't want to talk about the $1 billion he's pickpocketing in personal income tax. So let me give the minister some free advice. Inflation-proof personal income tax to protect the family budget. Put back the $1 billion he's taking. Stop the hikes to school fees, tuition, and property tax. Put the cap back on insurance premiums and electricity rates. If the minister is truly struggling to pay his own bills, why doesn't he pick one of his own bad policies and reverse it?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, I find it very rich that the members opposite would look to give this government advice on financial matters. Mr. Speaker, the trajectory they were on by raising taxes on everything that moved in this province, by creating additional regulatory burden, Mr. Speaker, they chased out tens of billions of dollars of investment with the job opportunities, Mr. Speaker. We're delivering efficient government so we can keep taxes low, Mr. Speaker, so we can make strategic reinvestments in health, in education, Mr. Speaker, and to ensure that every Albertan has the ability to increase their skills.
The honourable member for Calgary Mountain View has the call.
Mr. Speaker, the government promised Albertans relief from sky-high natural gas rates. Then they produced a fake program. Now they're only giving $50 back for electricity bills that have climbed into the hundreds. Robin shared her bill with us and how it rose from $350 last month to $700 this month. What does the Premier have to say to Robin? Does he really think that a $50 check is real help with her $700 bill?
The Honourable the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Only the NDP could be so unaware that they would actually be personally involved in driving up the electricity prices in the manner in which they did, Mr. Speaker, and then have the audacity to complain that the help that we're giving Albertans is not big enough. Mr. Speaker, we're giving more support to Albertans than the NDP did, and we will continue to look at ways that we can modernize the electricity grid and also to NDP-proof the electricity grid so that we don't have to suffer these three things in the future.
The honourable member for Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, real Albertans are choosing today between groceries and their electricity bill, and that minister thinks he deserves a pat on the back for a $50 rebate. Robin is not alone. Kelsey also wrote to us. Her bill has doubled to over $600. She's concerned about paying her other bills. All this government can offer is a rebate she likely won't qualify for, and $50 off hundreds of dollars in new costs. Is this really the best that the Premier has to offer to Albertans like Kelsey who are struggling as a result of his government's decisions?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President Treasury Board has risen.
Mr. Speaker, we do have high electricity costs in this province, and that's why we've offered a rebate for the months January through March. But, Mr. Speaker, again, I find it very rich that the members opposite would raise this issue because it was their failed policies that put us in this situation. They spent $7.5 billion on transmission costs that consumers are now paying for. They overbuilt the system. Mr. Speaker, they prematurely paid out power purchase agreements costing Albertans $1.3 billion. Albertans are paying today. And, Mr. Speaker, they introduced a carbon tax that cost every Albertan and Alberta senior higher costs in utilities.
The honourable member.
These are real people, Mr. Speaker, real people who can't afford their medication, and all that minister has for them is bluster. Deborah also wrote to us saying that her bill has increased over the past few months, and the most recent one was nearly $1,000. She's worried about how she can continue to keep the lights on and keep her house warm. Is this Premier really satisfied with telling Albertans like Deborah that $50 and a fake rebate is the only thing they're willing to provide? If they can't do better, can they at least apologize to Albertans for lying to them?
The Honourable the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP were grossly negligent. And by the way, when I say grossly negligent, I don't mean when the NDP ethics critic was investigated by the RCMP Cyber Crimes Unit. I mean when they overspent $7.5 billion in transmission, Mr. Speaker, and then they hung those costs on the ratepayer. Right. Mr. Speaker, they also brought in additional policies that drove electricity prices up. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we gave a rebate to Albertans, and we're going to continue to look at ways that we can modernize the system and protect Albertans from further NDP hangovers.
Order. The honourable member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is International Women's Day. This is a special day to recognize the important role women play in the development and success of our province. Our government has taken a number of steps to improve the lives of women throughout the province. Can the Associate Minister of the Status of Women tell the House what the government has done recently to help women thrive in our economic recovery?
The Honourable the Associate Minister of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know the important role women play in the development and success of our province and focus on ways to support them in righting
the next great chapter in our Alberta story. Just today, Alberta's government is investing $1 million in bursary programs at Bow Valley College, Norquest College, and Yellowhead Tribal College. We also recently invested $1.9 million to an Amazon Web Services pilot program that will assist up to 40 women with training and connections to the local IT and cloud computing sectors, because we know how important it is to support women in tech. Investment like this is making a real difference.
The honourable member for Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the response. Given that we know education is a valuable tool which helps foster economic growth in our province, and given that we see more women and girls interested in careers in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, to the Associate Minister, what is the government doing to help support women who want to study STEM?
The Honourable the Associate Minister of the Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, as I just mentioned, we just announced today $1 million in bursary programs that will ensure women have the opportunity to pursue post-secondary education in STEM at Bow Valley College, Norquest College, and Yellowhead Tribal College here in Edmonton. Every little girl in Alberta today has the potential to do great things. That's also why we've offered scholarships for STEM of $150,000, and we will be doing more on this. You know, these funds help more women every day pursue fulfilling and in-demand careers that will help them support themselves and their families.
Honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister. Given that women in Alberta work across many different sectors, including those who are looking at building rewarding careers in the skilled trades, and given that many tradeswomen are leading the way in everything from welding to hairstyling, to the Associate Minister, what is the government doing to help women build a rewarding career in the trades?
The Associate Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for the question. Skilled trades offer a rewarding career, and our government is proud to support organizations like Women Building Futures, for which there was a $10 million investment, and we're proud to support these types of investments to help ensure women get the hands-on experience that they need to become seasoned professionals and hit the ground running. Skills work contributes so much to our economy and is on investment in Alberta's future to support women entering these fields.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Whitewood has a question.
Mr. Speaker, another day, another announcement from this UCP government to try to fix what they broke. This time it comes after causing years of anguish for young people aging out of government care, an age group where we've seen 2.5 times the number of deaths since 10 years ago. Now, after announcing she would cut young people aged 22 off necessary emotional supports 2 years ago, the minister is saying she will reinstate them. Will the minister finally admit that cutting these supports for these young people was wrong in the first place? And why is she still providing $10 million less in supports for them?
Yep, good. The Honourable the Minister of Children's Services.
Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite knows, the changes that we announced in Budget 9 2019 are still included in the budget today. Mr. Speaker, at that time when we made changes to the age of eligibility for supports and financial assistance agreements, we made those changes and then we made it clear that changes needed to be made to that program to better support young adults that were transitioning out of care and into adulthood, Mr. Speaker, and that is exactly what we did. We took some of the best parts of the Advancing Futures program, which are the social and emotional supports that young people need to succeed, and we brought those into one transition to adulthood program.
Just provide some caution that unparliamentary comments made off the record are still unparliamentary. The honourable member for Edmonton-Whitewood.
Given that the opposition has been raising concerns about these changes to the SAFA program since it was first announced 2 years ago, and given that these same concerns have been raised by youth, the Child and Youth Advocate, including members of the Advocates Youth Council, and given that this new transition program essentially puts back in place the dedicated caseworker that these young people already had, and the only reason the UCP is reversing course is because one young, brave woman came forward to take them to court about it. Yes. My question is, what will it possibly take to get this minister to admit that she was wrong and apologize to the young people in her care?
Yes. The Honourable the Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, this program is exactly what we committed to. We had a program that basically was focused on monthly allowances, and we needed a program that really walked through the supports and skills that young people needed to transition out of care and successfully into adulthood, and that, Mr. Speaker, is exactly what we have now. We are taking the best of both programs, wrapping them together. We're increasing the monthly allowances that these young people will receive. We're focusing on positive transitions either into adult programming or adulthood, Mr. Speaker. This is exactly what we committed to and exactly what we did.
Honourable Member for Edmonton-Whitemud.
Well, given that today in budget estimates, and again right now, the minister is trying to pretend as though a dedicated caseworker for youth aging out of care is somehow new, and given that the minister appears to be ill-informed about the supports these young people were receiving, which may explain why she had no problem cutting them in the first place, and given that people in the sector were emailing me today during estimates to fact-check the minister in real time, contradicting her, my question is, after all of this, how does the minister expect Albertans, particularly the very young people she is responsible for, to trust her?
Good question.
Point of order is noted at 2:10. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do, in fact, very purposefully understand the changes that we made to this program because they were exactly what we heard from caseworkers and young people who were transitioning into adulthood. They are changes that are being made in other provinces across this country, Mr. Speaker, and they're exactly what we committed to. I'm happy to quote young people like Spencer, who said, quote, "There's just so much to manage when you start out, like budgeting and taking care of yourself. I'm glad that young adults will have additional supports to help them through this challenging time." Mr. Speaker, we've also had young people reach out to say a program like this helped me out to become independent. That is the purpose of this program, Mr.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert is next.
While the UCP cheer on their hollow budget, those in the most vulnerable situations in this province see nothing to celebrate. The UCP will claim they're not making cuts, but a flat budget for those on income support and AISH is forcing them to stretch their limited income even more as the cost of living increases, and the budget is most certainly not balanced for them. Can the Minister of Community and Social Services please explain if the price of gas, utilities, the cost of groceries, rent, insurance, and the government's revenue is increasing from sky-high oil, so why aren't supports for the most vulnerable going up, at least indexed to inflation?
The Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the opposition raising a very good question. As the Minister of Finance has already addressed, we are having a rebate program. We are eliminating the fuel taxes as a way to mitigate the inflation issue. Mr. Speaker, about AISH program, let me tell you this. With budget 2022, we have increased AISH budget to $13.7 billion, again, the highest in Alberta's history.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Given the increasing amount of poverty and homelessness across the province, and given that even before costs for everything shot up, communities were pleading for additional homeless supports, and given that the province has kept the funding for homeless supports the same this year as they have for the last 2 years, I'm frustrated that the UCP has not learned anything from mistakes. They're not providing enough, and communities are tired of the patchwork. It's just reactive. With cost of living pushing more people into poverty and making it more expensive to deliver services, why is the UCP making the same mistake and underfunding supports for homeless people?
The Honourable Member for Minister of Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, we're not taking advice from one failed NDP government. Homelessness is a complex issue. Mr. Speaker, we shared in the House that we established a homeless task force that is aiming at taking a structural, different approach to address this issue. We're focusing on housing first. We're also looking at recovery-oriented continuum care so that we provide a comprehensive, coordinated response to homelessness. Mr. Speaker, we have a better solution for Albertans.
The Honourable Member.
Given that the Mayor of Edmonton said this budget was balanced on the back of vulnerable Albertans, and given that rural communities outside of the large cities are seeing drastic increases in homelessness and poverty, but are receiving no increased supports from the UCP government, or they're not even getting a listening ear, Given that this government received more revenue from high oil prices, and they continue to completely ignore the most vulnerable in Alberta. On this side of the House, we want to live in an Alberta where everyone is supported, where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. How can this minister sit by and do nothing? Explain to vulnerable Albertans why you don't give a damn.
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, to the honourable member just said that nobody talks to me. I can tell you I spent largely many hours every day talking to municipal leaders and listening carefully to their concerns, passing them on to my colleagues who react responsibly and in a timely way. Mr. Speaker, we have our ear to the ground when it comes to municipalities, and we will continue to do so because they're a very important source of information for us, and we will continue to do that.
The Honourable Member for Athabasca, Barhead, Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has been unrelenting in our focus on investment attraction, economic growth and diversification, and job creation. Alberta's business-friendly recovery plan has positioned Alberta to lead all provinces in economic growth. We're also seeing a surge in net interprovincial migration, further evidence word is spreading Alberta is the best place to be. And the Alberta Affordability Advantage greets workers when they arrive here. To the Minister of Finance, what are some of the affordability advantages these families can look forward to when they arrive in Alberta?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's true. Alberta does have an affordability advantage today, and Mr. Speaker, part of that advantage is the lowest tax structure in the nation. We have the highest basic personal exemption of any province, Mr. Speaker, allowing more Albertans to earn more before they pay $1 provincial income tax. In fact, Mr. Speaker, 40% of Albertans pay no provincial income tax at all. Mr. Speaker, if you have a family of 4 living in Alberta, if we moved them to Ontario, they would pay $3,800 more in personal income tax with $75,000 worth of income, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Athabasca, Barhead, Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. Given that Albertans typically earn more, pay less in overall taxes, and generally enjoy lower food and transportation costs, and given that Budget 2022 makes Alberta an even more affordable place to call home, to the same minister, how does Budget 2022 help grow the Alberta Affordability Advantage?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, we do have an Alberta affordability advantage. Mr. Speaker, this Budget 2022, adds over $600 million, Mr. Speaker, for childcare to ensure that families can obtain accessible, affordable childcare in this province. Mr. Speaker, we're adding $15 million to low-income students to support their education endeavours. And Mr. Speaker, we're investing $390 million over 4 years to ensure that everybody in rural Alberta has world-class digital connectivity.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that global energy prices have increased significantly, and given that Alberta families are now faced with rapidly increasing fuel and utility costs, and given that Alberta consumers need reliable energy to survive the challenges of living in a northern climate, to the same minister, what is this government doing to help families reduce the financial pressures they are faced with due to these rising energy costs?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We recognize that energy costs are creating affordability issues for Albertans, even though we have an affordability advantage. And to that end, Mr. Speaker, we are halting the collection of the fuel tax. That's 13 cents a litre for Albertans. And Mr. Speaker, this program will be in place all year, reevaluated every quarter. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, we are rebating every Albertan who has an electricity bill by $150 for January through March of this year. And Mr. Speaker, we have a natural gas consumer price protection measure in place as well.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton South has a question.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta families are seeing their cost of living soar. Inflation is up, gas prices are up, utility bills are up, and even taxes are going up. Given that Albertans have been hit with an increasing insurance cost and inflation, and given that this government is doubling down on nickeling and diming Albertans through sneaky personal income tax hikes and increasing user fees, why is this government piling on instead of making life more affordable?
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government's working very, very hard as we bring forward a balanced budget, Mr. Speaker, lowering the cost of taxes for Albertans, Mr. Speaker, and bringing in rebate programs for both electricity and gas, Mr. Speaker. But again, Mr. Speaker, to this honourable member, he needs to explain to this House what was taking place at his home when the RCMP raided it recently, Mr. Speaker, and what the official opposition knew about the investigation that is being undertaken into him and them, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that it seems like this government is ignoring the cost of families, and given that Alberta families are still recovering from the effects of the pandemic, and given that rising energy prices and rising food prices are driving up the cost of living for Albertans and my constituents, why is the government continuing to raise property taxes through increases to the mill rate?
The Honourable the Government House Leader has risen.
Again, Mr. Speaker, we are working very, very hard to bring in rebate programs that can help Albertans as we go through these tough times. But, Mr. Speaker, this honourable member must address this issue with the House. What did the official opposition leader know about his actions? Why has the RCMP served search warrants on his personal home, Mr. Speaker? And why, Mr. Speaker, has the official opposition completely abandoned him? Mr. Speaker, he should stand up in this House, explain what's gone on. Albertans deserve to know what is taking place, and they deserve to know what the NDP knew about it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems like this government is doing nothing about affordability. And given that Alberta's purchasing power has inarguably taken a hit, and if this budget is balanced on the backs of hard-working Albertans, will they just admit that this is a terrible budget and they have nothing good to say?
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we brought Budget 2022 forward, a balanced budget. We brought fiscal sustainability and responsibility back to the province, Mr. Speaker. That allows this government to make strategic reinvestments in health care, in education. Mr. Speaker, the issues that the member opposite raises, the affordability issues, particularly in utilities, are a result of failed policies implemented by the members opposite, Mr. Speaker. We're correcting the fundamentals that have led to those increased costs, and we're providing relief in the meantime.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Castle Downs.
Mr. Speaker, Calgary's unemployment is the highest in the country. The cost of living is becoming unbearable for many, and this government has missed its job targets by 130,000. That's 130,000 Albertans who are making no money right now and being faced with skyrocketing utility prices, gas prices, property taxes, school fees, you name it. My first question is simple. Why would the Minister of Economic Development stand in this House every day and celebrate when so many are struggling? Is he really that tone deaf?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, 130,000 jobs created last year, Mr. Speaker. In the first month alone, 7,000 new jobs. When the rest of the country, Mr. Speaker, lost 200,000 jobs, Alberta gained jobs. The best thing that we can do to help people pay their bills is make sure they have employment, Mr. Speaker. Under the former government, under the NDP, they told Albertans to leave this province to get employment, Mr. Speaker. We're going to do everything we can to make sure Albertans have high-paying jobs.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Castle Downs.
Given that one bright spot for Alberta amid all of the incompetence from that side of the House is the film industry, but given that this government promised stakeholders that it would reinstate the NDP's interactive digital media tax credit, that critical program was nowhere to be found in the budget, and given that credit would create more jobs in the film industry in areas like animation and post-production, can the minister explain why he once again failed stakeholders despite promising to do better in what turned out to be a bogus provincial budget?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we are so proud of the film and television industry. Mr. Speaker, the NDP failed, Mr. Speaker, failed the film and television industry for 4 years. Right now, we have the largest TV series in Canadian history right here in Alberta because of the steps this government took, Mr. Speaker. And we have effectively 0% unemployment in the tech and innovation space, Mr. Speaker. We're more diversified than ever. We're winning for Albertans and diversifying our economy.
The Honourable Member.
Given that that we need to provide proper education to be ready for jobs in film and digital media, if we don't train them, the jobs will go elsewhere and our future leaders will leave too. But given that the UCP is putting 1,000 fewer teachers in our K-12 schools, has cut post-secondary funding by more than $600 million, and is ramming in a curriculum that puts students out of step with film, digital, and tech industries, can the minister tell this House if he supports such devastating cuts to education and moving forward with a curriculum no one supports? If he does, how can he possibly care to claim about job creation?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, the budget that this government introduced includes $600 million to help make sure we address labour shortages in Alberta. And yes, Mr. Speaker, labour shortages in our province, Mr. Speaker. Who thought we would have had that challenge in the middle of this pandemic? But this province is bouncing back faster than anyone could have imagined, Mr. Speaker. We have a long way still to go to help make sure we support people, Mr. Speaker. But on top of that, maybe the member opposite missed the fact that Bow Valley College just this week announced the fact it's opening up its school in this exact area.
The Honourable Member for West Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents have reached out to me upset and shocked at their high utility costs. As a power engineer who ran a power plant and a large industrial consumer of electricity, I'm very familiar with ideological decisions made by previous governments that have led us to this point. Most recently, the NDP decision to rapidly transition from coal while subsidizing major corporations with hundreds of millions of dollars from taxpayers is one example of poor ideological decision-making. To the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity, could you explain what you're doing to help reduce the impacts of these poor policies?
The Honourable the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity.
Mr. Speaker, in 2015, Albertans elected an accidental government with paper candidates. Now, when they descended on the legislature with nothing more than their hopes and dreams, they then proceeded to oversee the largest overbuild of the transmission system in our province's history. Mr. Speaker, they broke the electricity system, and we're going to fix it. Now, we are going to bring fiscal restraint and accountability to electricity in Alberta, something that the NDP is just not capable of doing.
The Honourable Member for West Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. Given that from 2015 to 2019, the rapid expansion of utilities came with a $7 billion price tag, and a whopping $1.3 billion was lost on the balancing pool, a bill we will all be repaying until 2030. Given that I only have 35 seconds and it would take 35 years to tell of all the mistakes the NDP made with our electricity market, can the same minister explain what he is doing to address these failures?
The Order, the Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when the NDP asks about the high cost of electricity, it's ironic. Not as ironic as the NDP ethics critic being investigated by the RCMP Cyber Crimes Unit, but it is ironic nonetheless, Mr. Speaker. Now, we are bringing forward some solutions that are going to help Albertans. That includes the $150 rebate. Mr. Speaker, we're also bringing fiscal accountability to the transmission grid. They spent $7 billion in 4 years on transmission. In the last 2 years, we spent $100 million. That's fiscal accountability, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to look at ways that we can drive down prices and NDP-proof the electricity grid.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. Given that the rate cap masks the true cost of energy by shifting the cost from the ratepayer to the taxpayer, and given that many Albertans are worried about future incurring costs, once again to the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity, how are we continuing to encourage a diversified grid without spending unnecessary taxpayer dollars?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that the path forward for lower electricity prices is increased competition and more choice. So we are creating long-term solutions and encouraging competition with our commitment to the energy-only market. This approach is working, Mr. Speaker, because we have 4,000 megawatts of generation that is going to be coming online shortly and is at different phases of approval in front of the AUC. Mr. Speaker, we're going to do all of this without hanging increased costs on the ratepayer. They broke the electricity grid, Mr. Speaker. We're going to fix it.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
International Women's Day, let's reflect on some important facts. Women are the key to every aspect of a healthy economy and healthy community. Data shows that when women entrepreneurs are financed, they are extremely successful, which benefits the broader community. Research also shows that women-founded and co-founded startups tend to perform better than all male ones, and businesses founded by women in general are shown to be significantly better financial investments. So why has this government not prioritized the economic empowerment of women in Alberta? Do they not want to support some of the strongest drivers of our economy?
The Honourable the Associate Minister of the Status of Women.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I find it interesting that the members across want to talk about the economic empowerment of women. Let me tell you about how they empowered women. Tens of thousands lost their jobs while they were in government. Every single woman paid higher bills because of their carbon tax. Every one of them faced higher personal income taxes. Thousands and thousands of women entrepreneurs lost their businesses during their term. There was a mass exodus of women from this province, and you know what, Mr. Speaker? This government on this side has done everything to reverse that.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
Given that advancing gender equality in economic and social spheres is not just the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do, and given that this is an evidence-based way to increase the prosperity of industry as a whole, and investing in women's economic empowerment sets a direct path towards gender equality, poverty reduction, community safety, and inclusive economic growth. Why does this government ignore the data, ignore the clear indicators, ignore the very women of Alberta, and diminish what could be a major economic ministry into an associate role with barely a mandate or any capacity to enact change?
The Honourable Associate Minister of the Status of Women.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, we could talk about how governments should and can support women, and I can tell you that this government has done more to support the equality of women by making sure that the women in this province have access to affordable daycare. The previous government across, you know what they did? They managed to put together a pilot program that didn't even deliver daycare to even the most deserving and most needy of it. And I got to tell you, this government's done a way better job on that.
The Honourable the Member.
Women make enormous contributions to economies, whether in businesses, on farms, as entrepreneurs or employees, workers, doing unpaid care work at home. And given that women not only work, but so often are expected to take on second, third shifts associated with household work and caregiving, and given that women remain disproportionately impacted by poverty and are often limited in their ability to work due to the need for childcare, where this government has let them down once again. Why is this government so set on making it even harder for women by raising costs on absolutely everything and making life less affordable?
The Honourable the Associate Minister.
Mr. Speaker, wow. You know, the members opposite, when they were in government, raised the cost of everything for women in this province by instituting the carbon tax. We, on this side of the House, eliminated the carbon tax. We reduced taxes. We're eliminating the fuels tax for 3 months. We're doing rebates on electricity. I'm sorry, but I think that this side of the House knows exactly how to help women.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Millwoods and the Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, for 2 years, frontline workers in hospitals, restaurants, schools, essential businesses, and more have gone to work in uncertainty. They feared getting COVID-19, many did, and some are still recovering. Now, we all hope the pandemic is ending, but these workers are facing a new crisis, massive increases to their personal cost of living, many coming as a direct result of decisions from this UCP government. Can the Minister of Labour explain to these frontline heroes why his government won't provide real relief on utility bills and reverse the decisions that are driving up their costs after all that these workers have done for us during the pandemic?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Immigration.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in response to COVID-19, Alberta's government has taken a number of actions to protect and support Albertans through these challenging times, including the job-protected leaves, deferring WCB premiums when businesses needed it most, and paid vaccination leaves. Mr. Speaker, we know that there's much to be done, and that is why Alberta's budget 2022-2023 will go further in delivering for Alberta workers.
The honourable member for Edmonton Millwoods.
Given that I hear from many people in my constituency of Edmonton Millwoods who need their vehicles to get to and from the office, and for many of them their vehicle is their office. They drive cabs, delivery trucks, trades vehicles, and so much more. And given that this government pulled the 5% cap on insurance rates after being lobbied by their insurance lobby friends, can the minister tell this House for the record how much the average Albertan's insurance has increased since this government took office? And can he tell them why he won't restore the cap and end these ridiculous increases that are hurting families in all our constituencies?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I can tell this House is the reforms that we brought forward in Bill 41 last fall around automobile insurance seem to be working. Mr. Speaker, these were reforms that dealt with the fundamental systemic issues that were pushing up automobile insurance rates, issues that the members opposite simply didn't deal with. I can report to this House, Mr. Speaker, that automobile insurance premiums are flat to declining, and that's good news for Albertans.
The honourable member.
Given that answer in Bill 41 hasn't helped my constituents, and given that my colleague, the member for Lethbridge West, an official opposition finance critic, confirmed today that the UCP's sneaky bracket creep scheme is costing Albertans $1 billion in taxes, and given this UCP billion-dollar tax grab is going to hurt my constituents and all Albertans, it's frankly shameful. Minister, my last question is simple. How can you possibly stand there and pretend to care when you're taking another $1 billion from our constituents, all Albertans, $1 billion they don't have while everything is getting more expensive?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President, Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I want to talk for just 35 seconds about caring for Albertans. Mr. Speaker, as we consider the next generation of Albertans, I believe it's critically important that we put this province on a sustainable fiscal trajectory by making disciplined financial decisions, by positioning the province for disproportionate investment attraction, economic recovery and growth, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're doing. That's what this budget does, Mr. Speaker. This leaves the next generation for a prosperous Alberta.
The order. The honourable member for Lethbridge East is the only one with the call.
Mr. Speaker, previously Alberta had no specific rules or regulations for payment timelines in the construction industry. If not directly addressed by a contract, these timelines were left ambiguous. Bill 37 amended the Builders Lien Act and became the new Prompt Payment and Construction Lien Act in 2020. This act addresses these issues by introducing a clear timeline and regulations for payment and liens in the construction industry. Can the Minister of Service Alberta talk about the specific regulation changes individuals in the construction industry can expect to see upon implementation?
The Honourable Minister of Service Alberta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as our economy continues to recover, to grow, and to diversify, Alberta's government is protecting jobs by bringing its prompt payment legislation into force. Members in the construction industry had been advocating for this framework for many, many years, and while the NDP sat on this for 4 years, we have taken action and worked with the industry at every level to create legislation and regulations that make sense. These regulations will solve so many problems, Mr. Speaker, including dealing with the administration of an adjudication process for dispute resolution, as well as dealing with lien holdback payment protocols and the transition.
The honourable member for Lethbridge East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. Given the construction industry is a multi-billion-dollar sector of Alberta's economy that creates thousands of jobs for Albertans, employing approximately 1 in 10 Albertans, and given that this new legislation will act to protect contractors, subcontractors, labourers and suppliers who have provided labour and materials for a construction project, to the same Minister, can you identify the specifics of how this legislation will seek to protect labourers and suppliers?
Honourable Minister of Service Alberta.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great question, and I'm happy to tackle that. Mr. Speaker, we know that over the last number of years, the average time for payment in Alberta's construction industry has increased from within 45 days to well over 70 days. And that's just the average, Mr. Speaker. In many cases, it's well over 100 days. That is why this prompt payment framework was so important and why I was so proud to work with the construction industry to develop it. The legislation will address, first and foremost, ensuring that when a proper invoice has been issued, payment will be issued within 28 days. That's going to move the needle in the construction.
The honourable member.
Thank you to the Minister for that answer, Mr. Speaker. And given that there are numerous changes to the original Builders Lien Act, and given that there has been collaboration with construction industry representatives to create supporting regulations and to develop specific processes, and further given that the Prompt Payment and Construction Lien Act, the Builders Lien Forms Amendment Regulation, and the Prompt Payment and Construction Lien Regulation will come into force on August 29th of this year, 2022. To the same Minister, what can workers expect to experience during this rollout transition?
The Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the member is right. We have had so much collaboration on this issue over the last year and a half, and we've been working so closely with members of the construction industry since 2019 to develop these new rules that will be in place this summer in Alberta. And over the next 6 months, Mr. Speaker, what they can continue to expect from us is that we will continue to work with industry very closely on education and on training, and to establish the tools needed for this adjudication system to ensure a seamless transition when the Act and regulations come into force on August 29th.
Honourable members, that concludes the time allotted for oral question period. In 30 seconds or less, we will continue to the remainder of the daily routine. If members are exiting the chamber, I ask that they do so quickly and quietly. The honourable member for Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo has a statement to make.
Virtue signaling, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister of Canada is a master at this, but he can do so much better. He can demonstrate honest virtue by supporting Canada's energy industry that ranks high in environmental, social, and governance measures. He can advocate on behalf of our industry to the international community and stop reliance on nations like Russia. Environmental measures weigh how a company performs as a steward of protecting nature. Social aspects examines how it manages its labor standards, its customers, and their communities. Governance deals with a company's leadership and financial aspects. Despite the negative reputation of Canada's oil sands, environmentally, we retain a quality virtually no other jurisdiction in the world can advertise. We reclaim used lands back to their original state. No other energy sector has financially invested in research and development to reduce carbon emissions as much as operators in Canada's oil sands. They have brought emissions levels initially witnessed with the first oil sands operations down to quantities currently seen around the world with conventional oil operations. Socially, employees of Canada's oil companies are well treated and support a society that is tolerant of all. Governance. We can rest assured that investors in Canada and our energy industry contribute back to pensions and other causes benefiting our lives. Exxon is losing $4 billion, Shell $3 billion, and BP a walloping $25 billion by exiting a nation that has demonstrated hostility. Can repair this. The world is witnessing the consequences of relying on energy from unethical regimes like that of Russia. Meanwhile, Western democracies are attempting to voice their disagreement by imposing economic sanctions, which ultimately serve as nothing but virtual signaling, since the international community continues to purchase Russian oil and gas. The left will say now is the time to invest in windmills and solar panels, but we know these to be unreliable sources of energy. This Prime Minister and the world need to embrace Canada's energy industry that has high environmental, social, and governance ratings and quit their hypocritical virtue signaling.
Go ahead. Go ahead. It's okay. The honourable member for Edric Cochrane has a statement to make.
Mr. Speaker, on February 18th, Trudeau pulled a fast one, announcing a halt to public funding of Trans Mountain. That's right, the federal government's mismanagement of this project caused a $9 billion deal to turn into a $21.4 billion boondoggle, and the project is only half done. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me outline the details of this public disclosure because they are very intriguing. Trudeau, after invoking the Emergencies Act, announced TMX's demise amongst chaos. He did this while arresting peaceful protesters, freezing bank accounts, running over elders, and pepper-spraying citizens. He did this in the wake of a violent eco-terrorist attack at the Coastal GasLink pipeline site in BC, where 20 assailants wielding axes terrorized employees and used explosives to destroy construction trailers, including an attempt to set fire to a vehicle with workers inside. He did this while a madman amassed troops along Ukraine's border, beginning an onslaught to kill innocent people in a ruthless attack having potential to start a world war. But Trudeau looks at this turmoil as an opportunity to divest of a pipeline he had no intentions of completing to fulfill his misplaced vision of destroying Alberta's fossil fuel industry. An ethical industry that could replace Putin's tyrannical oil, paralyze his funding, and make Canada the world's preferred supplier of clean energy. Mr. Speaker, the Emergencies Act authorizes the federal government to take extraordinary measures in responding to national emergencies. It replaced the War Measures Act, with war characterizing the severe nature of its invocation. Its use should not be taken lightly. Mr. Speaker, if absolute power corrupts absolutely, with this megalomaniac in charge, Canada appears absolutely corrupt. Thank you.
The honourable member for West Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, Judy came into my office a couple of years ago and shared a heartbreaking story. She showed me pictures of the drug paraphernalia laying in her granddaughter's room that she had received from injection sites. It was enough to last a month. Judy told me her granddaughter was going to die because no one cared. People were enabling her in her addiction. Judy wanted me to remember her granddaughter as we focused on trying to make sure that other people did not lose their loved ones. A few months later, sadly, Judy was right. Her granddaughter, Judane, passed away. Mr. Speaker, this story is heartbreaking and is all too common in our province and our country. Mr. Speaker, people living with addiction are exactly that, people. They are sons, daughters, grandkids. They are siblings, parents, and grandparents. Our government cares deeply about this issue and is committed to fostering a healing journey and removing barriers so individuals can access help. Recently, we expanded the 4,000 new recovery spaces that were planned to 8,000 spaces dedicated to detox, treatment, and recovery. Alberta is also the first province to eliminate all user fees for publicly funded treatment. We've also launched the Digital Overdose Response System, a mobile app that can help prevent overdose deaths. If a user of the app becomes unresponsive to a timer, EMS is dispatched to save their life. We recently announced that Alberta will be the first province to provide an injectable opioid treatment drug, Sublocade, at no cost. Sublocade provides the client with 30 days of protection from overdose and reduced craving so they can pursue recovery. We also recently announced $1.4 million to expand and create a low-barrier division of the virtual opioid dependency program. Thanks to this program, Albertans anywhere in the province can get same-day access to evidence-based opioid treatment medications. Mr. Speaker, addiction ruins lives, it destroys communities, and it tears families apart. I'm proud that our government is providing the help necessary to help recover from addiction, to improve lives, rebuild communities, and strengthen families here in Alberta. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Presenting petitions. Notices of motions.
The Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give oral notice of Government Motion 12 to be put on the order paper of my name as follows. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly, A, recognize that the current air travel restrictions imposed by the Government of Canada have no measurable public health benefit and continue to impact hundreds of thousands of jobs in the air travel and tourism sectors. And B, call on the Government of Canada to revoke, I, its proof of vaccination requirements for airline passengers. And I should back up, Mr. Speaker, and say, 1, its proof of vaccination requirements for airline passengers, and 2, its pre-departure COVID-19 testing requirements for international airline passengers entering Canada. And Mr. Speaker, finally, I wish to advise the Assembly, pursuant to Government Motion 7, there shall be no evening sittings tonight.
Just section. You can extend the routine if you choose. The other thing, though, I just wanted to double check with the government house leader. Are you comfortable with the motion that you read is in fact the motion in which you desire on the order paper?
Well, I'll read it one more time, Mr. Speaker, if you like. But
Well, no, if you have, it's fine. I just don't want to, I want to make sure that you have what you want.
No, I think we're good.
Okay. And if you want to extend the routine.
Yeah, I will extend routine, please, Mr. Speaker.
Introduction of bills.
The Honourable, the Minister of Finance and the President of Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce Bill 2, the Financial Statutes Amendment Act 2022. This being a money bill, the Honourable, the Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of the contents of this bill, recommends the same to the Assembly. This bill consists of several legislative amendments which support government's commitment to responsible financial management and respect for Alberta taxpayer dollars. The bill also enacts several specific tax changes and supports red tape reduction by harmonizing federal and provincial tax legislation. If passed, these measures will help ensure efficient use of Albertans' tax dollars and protect valuable public services today and well into the future. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I move first reading of Bill 2, the Financial Statutes Amendment Act 2022.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board and Minister of Finance has moved first reading of Bill 2, Financial Statutes Amendment Act 2022. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? If so, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 2, Financial Statutes Amendment Act 2022 is now read a first time.
The Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Here, I request leave to introduce a bill being Municipal Government Face Mask and Proof of COVID-19 Vaccination Bylaws Amendment Act 2022. As proposed, the proposed changes, Mr. Speaker, to the MJ will ensure municipal bylaws align with the provincial approach to public health issues. Let me be perfectly clear. The changes proposed in this bill are extremely narrow and strictly focused on public health requirements related to COVID-19. If passed, the legislation would require municipal bylaws relating to masks to prevent the spread of communicable diseases or COVID-19 vaccines be approved by the Minister of Municipal Affairs in consultation with the Chief Medical Officer of Health. That's it. This approach will limit the ability of municipalities to bypass bylaws that contradict public health policies and rules enacted by the province. Again, only specifically related to COVID-19 or similar communicable diseases. For example, the proposed changes would prevent local governments from imposing mask bylaws on private sector operators such as grocery stores and retail businesses. These changes otherwise would have no impact on the day-to-day operations of Alberta municipalities. Most municipalities, Mr. Speaker, already comply with public health requirements for COVID-19, so the proposed changes will have zero impact on the vast majority of Alberta municipalities. Local governments would continue to have the authority to implement masking bylaws for the operation of municipal facilities such as recreation centres, public transit, and other municipal buildings and places that they actually own. Individual Albertans and Alberta businesses should have the option of whether or not to wear masks or to require their customers to wear masks, and the proposed amendments to the MGA will ensure that they have that choice. These changes will come into effect upon receiving royal assent. If passed, Mr. Speaker, this bill will ensure that Alberta has one clear public health policy as we move together on a path, we hope, towards normal. And I say we hope because no one can predict what this virus will do next.
I'd almost mistaken that for a second reading speech. The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs has moved first reading of Bill 4, Municipal Government, Face Mask and Proof of COVID-19 Vaccination Bylaw Amendment Act 2022. All those in favour of the motion for first reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 4, Municipal Government Face Mask and Proof of COVID-19 Vaccination Bylaws Amendment Act 2022 is now read a first time.
The Honourable Member for Central, P. Snotley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to request leave to introduce a bill, that being Bill 202, Public Health Transparency and Accountability Amendment Act 2022. Bill 202 will allow medical officers of health, cabinet, and the Minister of Health to make and issue health orders as needed, but with the added transparency and accountability that can be provided by the MLAs in the legislature so they can represent the views of their constituents, which of course is the role they were elected for. Thank you.
Honourable members, the member for Central Peace Notley has moved first reading of Bill 202, Public Health, Transparency and Accountability Amendment Act 2022. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? If so, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 202, Public Health, Transparency and Accountability Amendment Act 2022 is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning. Are there others? Seeing none.
Tablings to the clerk.
Honourable members, we are at points of order, and at 1:59, the opposition House Leader rose on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rose because the member from Lethbridge West and our official opposition finance critic, while asking her questions, the government House Leader was heckling her by saying, "Shannon, hey Shannon," and questioning how she was asking her question. It is a long-standing precedent of this House not to use first names, and heckling in that manner seemed to be a very deliberate attempt to throw her off her leader's question in this place. And so I call a point of order because using first names in this way seemed particularly malicious. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I confess I can't recall if I used the honourable member's first name. Certainly it would be a point of order if I did, Mr. Speaker. And as an abundance of caution, I'd be happy to withdraw and apologize if I did use the honourable member's first name.
I consider this matter dealt with and concluded because I too did hear you use her first name, so I appreciate the apology. At 2 o'clock, the Honourable Government House Leader rose on a point of order. And is someone from the government side wanting to argue this point of order? I'm not sure who you'd like to.
Mr. Speaker,
the Government House Leader himself.
Yeah, absolutely. We will rise at that time. The honourable member, whose name evidently I did use, is from Lethbridge West. Thank you very much. Heckled to the Minister of Finance that he, Mr. Speaker, was pickpocketing Albertans, Mr. Speaker, inside in her question. So actually, it was not a heckle. I have to rephrase, which is certainly an inappropriate thing. So I would rise on 23 H.I. and J, and not something that an honourable member of this place should be accused of.
The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I don't have the benefit of the blues. Certainly, if the honourable member had referred to him as an individual, then that would be unparliamentary. And if that was the case, I would apologize and withdraw.
Well, I appreciate the apology and withdrawal because I do have the benefit of the blues. And it says, for folks watching at home, the minister also doesn't want to talk about the $1 billion he's pickpocketing in personal income. So in fact, that would have been a point of order. Consider the matter dealt with and concluded. The statement is withdrawn and apologized for. At 2:10, the Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs rose on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm truly hopeful this won't take long. It may not be the worst sin committed here, but it was fairly blatant. Under 23L, introduces any matter in debate that offends the practices and precedents of the Assembly. At that point, Mr. Speaker, at that point, the member from Edmonton, Whitewood, stood up and said something very close to, "I receive a text right here in question period that said this." Now, Mr. Speaker, I refer to you to comments you yourself have made in this House, and more specifically to the memo that you sent at the start of this session, in which you wrote, and I quote, "Members may use their mobile devices during oral question period, but only use them as reading devices and not for streaming, sending, or receiving messages. All connectivity, including Wi-Fi and mobile data services, must be turned off during this time, i.e. airplane mode on and Wi-Fi turned off." Mr. Speaker, I just believe that if it was important enough to you to put it to us in a memo, it might be important enough for you to rule against us doing what you warned against in the memo that you took the trouble to send, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister was very excited about calling this point of order, but he did not hear correctly. The member very clearly was talking about emails she received during estimates when the Minister was providing information that stakeholders patently disagreed with, and we're taking the time to watch the estimates and correct the government through emails to the official opposition, and something that all ministers should be aware seems to be happening more and more often. I don't believe this is a point of order.
Why, thank you. I appreciate the submissions, and I do have the benefit of the blues. And what the member did say is that, and given that people in the sector were emailing me today during estimates and fact-checking the minister in real time. Now, this isn't a point of order, but I might just add that I am very excited that someone did, in fact, read the procedural memo. So from the very bottom of my heart to you, sir, thank you very much. Honourable members, we are at orders. This concludes the daily routine, and pursuant to Standing Order 59015B and the 2022-23 main estimate schedule, the Assembly stands adjourned until tomorrow afternoon at 1:30. Prior to rising, it is important to note that the Legislative Assembly policy committees will convene this afternoon and tomorrow morning for consideration of the main estimates. This afternoon, the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future will consider the estimates for the Ministry of Infrastructure in the Grasslands Room, and Resource Stewardship will consider the estimates for Treasury Board and the Minister of Finance in the Rocky Mountain Room. Tomorrow morning, the Standing Committee on Families and Communities will consider the estimates for the Ministry of Education in the Rocky Mountain Room, and the Standing Committee on the Alberta's Economic Future will consider the main estimates for the Ministry of Jobs, the Economy, and Innovation in the Grasslands Room. Honourable members, the House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 1:30 p.m.